All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. It looks like Mark Davis has found the guy to lead his beloved silver and black, and he didn't have to go that far to find him. The Las Vegas Raiders have decided that Antonio Pierce is going to be their next head coach. Now, Pierce was the Raiders linebackers coach this past season before becoming the team's interim coach when Josh McDaniels was fired mid-season. And under Pierce, the Raiders did go 5-4, which included an upset win at Arrowhead over the defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs on Christmas Day. Now, one thing is for sure, and that is the Raiders played very hard under Antonio Pierce. And some of the team leaders, such as defensive end Max Crosby and wide receiver Devontae Adams, went to bat for him to get this gig full time. Now, I'm not sure that Raiders team owner Mark Davis initially wanted to give Pierce the job, but at the end of the day, he had no choice for several reasons. The way, again, that the key players on this team went to bat for Antonio Pierce to get the job. You think back a couple of years ago to the Rich Bisaccia gaffe that resulted in the Raiders making Josh McDaniels their head coach. Now, it's one of those where some people can say maybe Rich Bisaccia deserved the job. Maybe some people are going to say he didn't, but nonetheless, I said it then that the Raiders hiring Josh McDaniels was a mistake. But nonetheless, you think about the situation that Rich Bisaccia had to walk into when John Gruden was let go midseason, and he righted the ship and got the Raiders to the postseason, and they were within an inch of knocking off the Cincinnati Bengals that year. And of course, we saw the Bengals get over that hump and get to the Super Bowl. So if you're the Raiders, you can only wonder what could have been for you. But nonetheless, I don't think that Mark Davis wanted a repeat of that. But I think what really pushed the Antonio Pierce dynamic home was that, you know what, Mark Davis is dragging his feet on this. Antonio Pierce went earlier this week and interviewed with the Tennessee Titans. And I think, you know what, that kind of hammered it home. And before, and when it was all said and done, you know what? If you're the Raiders, you got this guy in your own backyard, somebody that wants to coach this team. You can't let him out of your building. And finally, the Raiders were able to get it done. I said before, Pierce is somebody, you know, who wanted to coach the Raiders. He's basically from Compton. He grew up an LA Raiders fan. And, you know, of course, this guy had success in the National Football League as a linebacker, came to the league undrafted, first with Washington and then with the New York Giants. And then, of course, you know, him being a part of that Giant team in 2007 that upset the New England Patriots. And of course, Antonio Pierce was a catalyst for the Giants that year in their postseason run. And I think he really showed his leadership throughout that postseason run. He's gotten into coaching, you know, first in the high school and collegiate ranks as well. And at the end of the day, Antonio Pierce is just a guy who's a leader of men. And I think this is what the Raiders need because, again, you look at the way that this team played once he became the interim head coach. They played hard, they played physical. And I think that right there is a sign of coaching. And I think what really sweetened the pot, in my opinion, as far as Antonio Pierce getting the job, was those 2 weeks in December. First, you put up 63 points against the Chargers at home on Thursday night. And then you follow that up with the upset win over the Kansas City Chiefs on Christmas Day. I think that's helped to solidify AP's case. But nonetheless, to the very end of this season, we saw a night and day transformation with the Raiders. The same Raiders that were playing unmotivated and not together under Josh McDaniels turned it around under Antonio Pierce. But nonetheless, he's going to be that Raiders head coach going forward. We also saw Dave Ziegler get fired as the team's general manager when Josh McDaniels got fired, and assistant GM Champ Kelly was made the interim GM. And one would have to assume that Kelly's going to become the full time GM. He's basically in on these talks and negotiations with Antonio Pierce, and I don't see Mark Davis allowing Champ Kelly to have a say or be at the bargaining table, if you will, for a matter like this, if he's not going to name him the general manager, excuse me, going forward. But make no mistake about it, this is a Raiders organization that needs stability because the last head coach that the Raiders have had that lasted for more than 4 seasons, you've got to go back to when they were still the LA Raiders, when Art Shell was the head coach. No head coach for the Raiders, whether it was in Oakland or now in Vegas, okay, has gotten more than 4 years. This team needs stability. And speaking of the stability, you've got your head coach right now. Looks like you got your GM. The Raiders got to find their quarterback. I know that Josh McDaniels signed Jimmy G to that 3-year deal last year. Jimmy G is not in long-term future of this team. I mean, when AP took over, it was all about Aiden O'Connell at quarterback, the rookie out of Purdue. I think Aiden O'Connell has a future as a backup quarterback in the NFL. He's not a starter, but the Raiders do need a quarterback. You've got a strong running game. You've got a good offensive line, and that's something that Antonio Pierce wants because he preaches that physicality. And we've seen how the Raiders had that get off on the offensive line. We've seen how the Raiders had that get off on the defensive line. You need that quarterback to bring it all together. Now, the Raiders are slated to pick 13th in round number 1. Is there going to be a quarterback available for them there? Possibly. The Raiders could also look in free agency, but nonetheless, I think for Antonio Pierce and this regime to get things started on the right foot, you are going to need to find your quarterback, whether that's free agency, a trade, or in the NFL draft, especially if you're going to keep up in the AFC, especially if you're going to keep up in that division. Because the key is the Raiders have shown that they can beat the Chiefs under Antonio Pierce. That's the team that you have to catch in the AFC West. But you got to deal with Patrick Mahomes at Kansas City. You also have to deal with Justin Herbert in Los Angeles with the Chargers. We don't know who the Denver Broncos quarterback is going to be. More than likely, could be Jared Stidham, according to Sean Payton. We got to wait and see. But nonetheless, on that AFC side, the quarterbacks that you got to deal with overall, Lamar Jackson, you got to deal with Joe Burrow. Is Deshaun Watson going to come back healthy? We're seeing what CJ Stroud can be for the Houston Texans. So, nonetheless, and of course, Josh Allen with the Buffalo Bills. These are the guys that the Raiders are going to have to go through if they're going to be serious contenders in the AFC. And like I've said before, in this present day of the National Football League, if you don't have that guy at quarterback, you don't have a leg to stand on. So I think it's going to be very important going forward for Antonio Pierce to find his quarterback. Also, find the coaches to put around him to help cultivate him. And now Antonio Pierce is going to get the opportunity to put his coaching staff together, period. So it's going to be very interesting to see how things work out for AP and the Raiders. It's one thing when you're the interim head coach, it's another thing when you're the full time guy. But nonetheless, we saw these guys go to bat for him. And Antonio Pierce, I think, is going to be dedicated to the job. And I will say the one thing about this, I don't know how the wins and losses are going to come for the Raiders going forward. But one thing I will say, AP is going to give them everything that he has. And as a coach, if he gives them everything that he has, he's going to expect his players to do the same. One thing's for sure, you got a guy like Max Crosby as one of the leaders on this team. Max Crosby is a high motor guy. You can never accuse Max Crosby of not giving full effort. And as he gives full effort, he's going to want the guys around him to do the same thing as well. Again, Devontae Adams went to bat for him. So are the Raiders going to give him a quarterback that can consistently get him the ball? We got to wait and see. But nonetheless, I think this was a no-brainer for Mark Davis. He made the right move, in my opinion. He could have gone with a bigger name, maybe pushing for like a Jim Harbaugh or something like that. But I don't think it would have had the same impact, if you will, on this team. He went for sizzle before with Josh McDaniels, didn't work out. This time, Mark Davis went for substance. So let's see if Antonio Pierce is going to be the guy to bring back the silver and black. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank all of you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it will be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. Now you can check it out. Drop a line to be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin, and I am signing off. And I'm saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.